Hello, and welcome to Defining Endurance. I'm co host Lexi Miller. This episode is a super fun and exciting one. Not only am I joined by Andrew Simmons, but also Coach Zach Baker joins us to talk about one of our favorite races, the Boston Marathon. In this episode, we take a deep dive into the course and discuss what we love, what we hate, and how to train to run your best race. This is especially exciting because we recently launched a new program just for Boston. It is called Boston 2022 Teams. In this, you get access to a 16-week training plan, a race and travel guide, a cookbook, 4 webinars, 4 supported group runs if you live locally here in Colorado, one one-to-one call with any of the 3 coaches, and community access to the other racers so that you can talk about your training, your goals, and anything else with the race. At the end, we're actually going to have a group run in Boston before the race, a couple days before. It'll be so much fun. So if you don't live locally here in Colorado, I promise you will still be in for a treat. Anyway, tune in, let us know what you think, and if there's another race you want to hear a deep dive about, let us know. Now, let's jump in.
All right, guys, welcome back or welcome to the Defining Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Coach Andrew Simmons, and joining me today are actually 2 of our staff coaches, Miss Lexi Miller and Mr. Zach Baker, 2 veterans of the Boston Marathon course. And that's what we're going to be talking all about today is dissecting and breaking down the Boston Marathon course so that you guys have the best chance to run your best time at Boston, whether it's now or into the future. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, I'm stoked.
Yeah, me too.
This is going to be a fun one. I think the best place for us to kind of start things off today is actually talking all about getting to the Boston Marathon start. I think when it comes to big races, one of the things that can instantly give anybody anxiety is the worry about getting to Athletes Village. I will share just briefly from my end before I let you guys take over. My only experience with Athletes Village was a very wet, very rainy 2018. So I don't believe I had the best Athletes Village experience because getting to the school was extremely soggy and wet. And I took an Uber, but I still had to walk almost a mile and a half to even get to Athletes Village. And I think that's one thing to really consider is there's kind of the extra pre-race warm up of getting to Athletes Village. So I will let you guys kind of hop into there, but that is my experience with the course getting to Athletes Village. Anything you guys want to share there?
I mean, for most people, it's the longest bus ride that you could expect to take before a race. I think everyone starts getting this anxiety of like, are we going to the start? It seems like it's been a long time. If you start from Boston Commons, hop on the bus, take the bus to Athletes Village. I ran 2018, 2019, both starts were very rainy. So just, bringing those extra socks or throwaway socks, trash bags for your feet, thrift store clothes to stay warm was crucial.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good 45-minute bus ride to get out there. And if you haven't ridden on a school bus in a number of years, as some of us haven't, you kind of forget how cramped those seats can be. So it could be a little bit of a wake-up call. I personally kind of love the bus ride because I like you're kind of on it and there's this kind of electric energy. But then, usually when I'm doing a race, I'm maybe driving myself there or something. And in this case, like you're just on a bus. And so I kind of close my eyes and try to sleep. Like I bring a bagel or something to maybe munch on, like a bagel and a thing of Gatorade, and maybe have a little bit of a snack while I'm on that bus. Because again, you're dealing with the late start, right? You're dealing with a 10 a.m. start as opposed to an early morning marathon start that most people are used to dealing with. So it's going to be important to make sure that you're kind of getting the food in and keeping your energy levels topped up as you move in. But then I kind of like close my eyes, and then as you move out further from Boston and out into the country, that ride does seem super long. But you start to see these like cool like rock rocks that are kind of in the side of the highway. And that's when it starts to get exciting, because you're starting to get towards that early part of the Boston course that's out in the state park, where you can see those things happen. So it is definitely long to get out there. My pro tip, I think, early on the first few Bostons, because I've done 7 in person, I think, and then the 8th one was virtual, is like early on, I was getting on the first bus I could get on to make sure I got out there, because I felt like that would be a stress-free experience. But the kind of pro move, honestly, is to get on the last bus that you can possibly get on to make your starting wave, because then you get out there. If it's wet and rainy, then there's no hanging out in the athletes village. Like you don't have to spend that extra time there. So the more that I've done it, the more I try to kind of minimize my time prior to race start. I try to get on the last bus that I can get on, so that I can get off the bus in athletes village, hit a porta john, and just like rock straight to right to the start line.
Yeah, I wish I would have done that in 2018. I was pretty miserable. It was so wet and so cold there. I saw the people that definitely had, they had the plastic bag with their shoes in the plastic bag with an extra pair of socks. And, I was in the A wave. I was a sub 500, start number. So like, I knew I was going to get going, but there's nowhere to warm up. There's no like tent to go stand under. There's no heater. It's like you're there, and it's a village of porta potties. That's about the extent of what it is. And that school, it had been saturated for so many days that everywhere you walked was pretty miserable. So if you are going to be walking, through that athletes village, and it's going to be a wet start, a wet New England start, bring your shoes in a plastic bag. I think Zach, you nailed it with bringing an extra snack. You can always throw extra snack and food away when you get to Athletes Village. There's no food there. There's nothing for you there other than what you have with you.
Oh, there is though. There's definitely stuff.
There's food and
Not the
coffee.
year that I found.
Yeah, there was.
Oh,
I had so much coffee that day.
Yeah, there's always
I
food and
had
coffee.
nothing.
Yeah. There's
nothing.
food, there's Gatorade, there's coffee. You must have come at it. I've never had the like Uber in experience of like trying to get there from a different method, but there's bagels, there's coffee, there's Gatorade and stuff that you can grab on a sunny year. Sometimes they'll have like sunscreen hanging out there. I've seen a number of different things. Like I think they try to do a good job with it, but I think just the pro move is if you're there to enjoy the experience, maybe hang out there a little bit just to see. But I personally don't find anything exciting about, again, a tent with some treats under it and a porta john. I definitely hit the pre-race coffee though. Like Lexi, I think that's another pro move, is because I'm used to having a half a cup of coffee before my race to get that extra caffeine in. So I almost always grab that when I'm in the athletes village. But yeah, and I think something else to realize is not just on wet years, on dry years, that field, it's a football field, it's well watered, it's dewy. So even if it's not necessarily been raining the night before, when you put 30,000 people walking across a well watered athletic field, it gets soggy. Your feet are gonna get wet. So think about that a little bit. And the same deal if you're going to be there, even if it's a not so rainy day, if you're planning to be there early and sit down, bring a heat sheet from an old race, bring something you can throw away that folds up little so that you can get it into your plastic bag. And that way you can sit on it and hang out under the tent or out in the sunshine before that race starts and not have your butt be completely wet before the race goes. I think that's kind of the keys to having a kind of successful pre-race Boston is to do all those different things.
And I think back to it now, I had stayed out in Hopkinton the night before. So I had come in from the other way. And I think just because I was with the pro and A wave people, there was just, I was so miserable. I actually remember I grabbed someone had an old heat sheet and I grabbed it and I wrapped it around my midsection to start the race. That's how I think I was just so out of it, and the tents were so packed with people, which is another thing that if it's a miserable wet year, you may not be getting in, those tents and things. I just pretty much walked to the start, and tried to get going.
18 was a pretty outlier year. That was the worst. I mean, I remember huddling under that tent and just like watching sheets of rain, like, whipping by outside. I mean, it was terrible. So yeah, I think that one's maybe there was no winning that particular year.
But it
That's
was a good
fair.
New
That's fair.
England day, so you have the story of I ran in 2018, so that's always
Oh God,
fun.
yes, it was. It
Swam.
was what my
Swam.
yeah, what some of my friends call type 2 fun, the kind of fun that's fun to tell people about after you have it. But the actual experience was pretty miserable. I don't think I've ever shivered while running. I think that was a new thing for me.
No doubt. No doubt. So I think one other thing that if this is your first Boston, you guys are coming into it, Athletes Village is still not completely the start. You've got a little bit of a trek to get to the finish line from there. There's still a little bit of a walk to get to the first little bit. It's not super far. At least the year that I did it, they had kind of changed the A wave that they had called everybody up and pushed everybody a little bit down into the start line. It's not super far, but just remember that you get there and you've got a little bit more walking. So you may need to shed some things. They were telling us to like get rid of anything that we didn't want at the start line because as the first people up at the start line, they just don't want a bunch of crap there. But I still wore my sweatshirt, the first, gosh, probably 4 miles that year. Whether that was water weight or not, for better or for worse. I think,
Yeah.
I think,
Oh,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Zach.
I was gonna say the other pro tip too is as you're walking to that line, everybody wants to hit the porta johns one last time before they leave Athletes Village. But there's an A and P right before you get into the corrals, and there's a big bank of bathrooms that's in there, and that's a good place to hit. So if the bathroom lines are long in the village and your wave gets called, don't worry about it. Head out to the start line, and there's those bathrooms that are there. And traditionally, those lines there'll still be a line there, but they're a little bit shorter, and they move a little bit quicker because everybody's kind of doing their business fast to get to the start line.
No doubt. Let's jump into kind of the start line and the corralling there. Um, for me, I was at the front of the race the year that I ran it. So I have a different experience than if you're in the corrals at all beyond that first wave. Anything you guys want to share there about kind of getting into the start and getting ready?
Well, you walk to the start, so that's kind of a nice chance to warm up. You might not be able to jog as it's a little crowded, but you can kind of try to get some high knees, some butt kicks. Just be mindful of everyone around you. And then once you kind of get to where you're standing, again, it might be hard to do some strides, but from back in my ski racing days, I'm a big fan of just doing the jumps and getting your legs warmed up in the standing in a small area. So you kind of have to be flexible with your warm up there.
Yeah, like any big race, there's just not a lot of room and not a lot of space. So I don't know that I have anything to add there other than that the energy starts to get really, really electric up there. And it's very cool. Like appreciate what's going on in that start line, and it'll be hard not to get swept up with it. I'm getting chills thinking about it right now. It's one of my favorite places in the world. So that Boston start line is, it's the best.
Yeah, I think I blacked out because I don't really remember anything until about mile 4. So my start, like everything like that, I was just kind of like I can remember just it's loud. That's I think the thing
Yeah.
that got me. The even 2018, as wet and nasty as it was, like it was so loud at the very start, and even for the next little bit. I think kind of diving into the start of things. I think you know the first mile drops like I think like 100 feet or so. And I think the best way for us to kind of break this down for people is we're going to kind of break the course down into some pretty distinct pieces. So if you're following along, we're kind of going from the Hopkinton area to Ashland, so kind of miles 1 through 4 here to kind of get us started and rolling through. This is kind of typically where everybody tells you, hey, you got to pump the brakes here. I think we all probably have a different strategy for what we would tell an athlete to do here. For me, I really try to tell people just to not overstride if pace is coming early, and you feel like you're at your goal pace, you may be even a little bit ahead. It's okay. As long as you feel controlled and you're not like, oh, I'm going 40 seconds a mile faster right now. I'm having a really good day. I usually say try to hover around your goal pace and kind of have that tempered excitement as much as possible because it's still going to be loud. This is one of those races that there are people end to end on this thing, with the exception of a few small areas. But yeah, I'd love to hear either of you guys' take on kind of the first 4 miles there.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to slow down, but then also it's so crowded and people are really they just have that energy going. So I've seen some people take some gnarly falls. So I again just being like especially if you're like me, you're a little bit shorter. It's easy to get kind of mowed over. So I do kind of that run with my elbows out a little bit to get a little bit of that space going and then just really watch your feet. Try and run like it's contained and modest, but everyone's going to be sprinting by you.
Yeah, even though Andrew's kind of saying that it's still loud, and it is probably the most deserted part of the course, like right after you get over the hump to the start and you're going down through the state park because there's not a lot of parking there. So there are fewer spectators, but the runners are, there's a lot going on there still, and it does pay to have your head on a swivel. I think my advice to folks is often to line up a little bit further back than you think that you normally would in a race, because remember, all of the people in this race with you are seeded by time, and there's so many fast people that are there that in a normal race where things might break up or kind of spread out a little bit, in the early mile or early couple miles, you're not really going to see any daylight until after 10K. I mean, so everybody's packed in really, really tightly in these early miles, and it's really easy to get swept along. And if you don't want to do what Andrew is warning against, which is to accidentally be running 40 seconds faster a mile than you want to, or something like that, if you're trying to maintain your even pacing, it pays to line up a little ways back and just sit there and not try to do a lot, because there's going to be people streaking up on the right side and on the left side. You're going to see people trying to make moves and get ahead and do that sort of stuff. Just relax, go with it, and kind of establish yourself there. Again, the people that you start the race with are people that you're probably going to be seeing and running with for a decently long period of time. So just kind of know that that's the situation going in, as opposed to the situation in other races where there's a lot more breaking up and maybe a lot more motion in some of those packs. But that's, to me, yeah, that's the key to those early miles. You don't want to be going too fast. You want to kind of just be getting used to what it's like running in that big group of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of running right down the center for as long as you can. I think
Yeah.
it's pretty impossible to take the quote unquote race line. In those early miles, you're going to be kind of situated where you are in the race. So that's the best bit of advice there, is to just, I think, try to relax. There is so much energy there that getting swept up is really easy, kind of in those first 4 miles.
I think that's
So,
a good thing to hit early on too. Is it's so straight, the course is, that there really is no
mhm.
worrying about hitting a race line in this race. Like other races, you might really be wanting to cut tangents, but in Boston, it's so crowded, and it is so straight when you look at the course map that
Mhm.
you're going to run a little bit long because of the crowds. But I think maybe that's something to get in your head early on too. Is like, don't try to cut tangents, because it's going to it's going to be more harm than good, kind of throughout
And
the
you're going to be
length of this course.
yeah, you're going to be cutting people off. And I think that's just, that's a chance to get tripped up, especially if it's wet. Not ideal. Um, Kind of looking at the next like 2 sections of the course, right? You've got Ashland to Framingham, and then Framingham to Natick. And I think kind of looking at miles kind of 4 through 10 is as our next group, kind of that next 10K. The way that I kind of look at it is this is where things do start to kind of flatten out a little bit. It's slightly rolling to flat. You pass train station, if I remember correctly. I think this was the first time I saw my parents, believe it or not, 4 times on the course the year that I ran it. And if you do have people out there, like they're gonna see you. They can yell for you. It's not like this huge cacophony of like pure noise until towards the end, or in some spots there are definitely louder sections. But for whatever reason, I could hear my parents, and maybe those all the years of training of listening for those voices. But man, if you have some spectators out there, like this was kind of the first place that I knew my parents said, "Hey, we're going to try and get to the train station," and so that was a cool moment for me. But I think kind of in this next section, like you should definitely be settled in on your pace here. If you're not settled in by now, it's going to get rough. And for reasons we'll share as everybody knows what's coming next. But this for me is where I try to tell everybody, like, by now, be settled in. You should have, this is probably right around in this section, kind of 4 to 10 is a good chance to take some nutrition. I'll have to look here. I'll pull up while we're all chatting through here, kind of where the water stops are. But definitely a good chance to really think about the nutrition. You're going to be, if you're around the 3 hour mark or really kind of being competitive, you're 40 minutes in at this point, up to, 45 minutes to the hour mark for most athletes for here.
Yeah. So, the first 4 mile is very remote. Like, I think when people think about Boston, they might think, if they haven't run before, they might think the whole thing's in a city. And it's very much not. So those first 4 miles, you're kind of in the trees. And then now you're getting into these cute little towns that are very old and historic. And there's like, I love looking around. I always recommend people not wear headphones in this race because one, you're going to like talk to so many awesome runners. And that's always my tip for pacing is I try and find someone early on. I'm like, hey, what's your goal time? Cool. Let's like hold each other accountable and not get swept up in the start. So at this point, like you're running through, you're seeing these beautiful old churches. There's people out cheering that just look like they live nearby. It's super awesome. But yeah, you start to get to where it's rolling. So if you start out too fast, you might already be kind of paying that price. And now's the time to kind of check yourself. I believe there's also a bathroom at mile 7 I've used twice. It's highly recommended.
I like the having bathroom reviews. Like I think that's a good move. That's a pro move as a guy who frequently uses the bathrooms along the course. I think my comment on these first few miles is right around mile 4. There's a biker bar on the left, which is usually pretty rowdy, and that's kind of my signal that we're coming out of the trees and getting into that cute New England rolling area. Even though this is described as the quote unquote flat part of the course, there's rollers everywhere. So you're going to be coming up. And it's one of the things that I love about the course is you see this sea of runners before you, in front of you going up and down. And you go up and then you come down a little hill and go into a cute New England town. And then you do the same thing. You go up and then you come down a hill and go into a cute New England town. So like, but Andrew's right. Like I see that biker bar and then it's like, okay, we're done with the downhill. Like let's get established kind of at this point. One of my favorite spots on the course is in this section. I think it's mile 7, which is near Framingham. There's an electrical supply store that says this is your mile 7 moment. Check style in windows, and they hang up like sheeting in their mirrored windows so that you can see your reflection as you go running by. And that's kind of cool because that's where everything's kind of finally opened up, and you might be running a little bit by yourself, and you can kind of like bask in the like, yeah, this is me running the Boston Marathon. So from a personal standpoint, that's one of my favorite spots in the course. I just really love that section there. Let's see. And then as you get sort of towards mile 9, you go through, there's like a lower spot that has some lakes and stuff in it. And I'm not sure if anybody else has had this experience, but I feel like the water that's at the water stop there is funky. Like other people may be fine, but I remember I ran in 2012 when it was mega hot, and I took like this big gulp of water from the water stop there, and it smelled weird. So I don't know if it's probably just their municipal water supply. There's probably no water safety issues there or anything. But I have since then just been like, maybe that's not the spot to guzzle a bunch of water because I didn't love it. So take that personal observation for what it's worth. But nothing really to add other than that. Like, get established in this section. This is enjoy the Boston experience and kind of, husband your strength, I guess, would be the phrase to use for what's going to happen as you roll forward, kind of past the 10-mile mark.
I think Zach is officially stating on this podcast that there's a conspiracy theory that it's lake water. That's 100% what I took away from this podcast so far is that
I don't know, man. Like, there was a smell. I didn't know if it was because it was 2012 and they were like filling stuff from the hydrants because there was dehydrated runners anywhere. I don't know, but that's what I found.
Just a theory. It's just a theory. People
just a theory. Just a theory. Yep. Yep.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely lake water. I'm going out on a limb. We're gonna start it. It's lake water.
They're just dipping buckets in the lake behind the water stop.
Hey, check to see if there's fish in your water cup, okay? But I think an important thing here is extra nutrition, which is actually my point is to talk about, kind of where do you guys fall when it comes to, are you a water then Gatorade person? Are you an every other water stop? Do you start with water first and then kind of Gatorade later miles? I found for me that I do, even mile 10-ish, I'm like, I could go for some Gatorade. I usually kind of recommend for people, a gel every 35 to 45 minutes, depending on their pace. Again, this is, your nutrition plan should be specific. And this is something that I work out with each of my athletes individually. But I say, it's okay to take the Gatorade as long as you've trained with it. I think that's an important thing, is that the fuel that they have on the Boston course is the endurance formula. So it tastes like double concentrated Gatorade. And then if they don't mix it right, it's like triple. So I usually grab a Gatorade and a water if I can. Yeah, I try to grab both if I can, depending on the order of operations there. And a pro tip for anybody, this is kind of my personal thing, is that if I'm coming into a water station and I know I want to take a gel, I take my gel just before getting to the water station. You can kind of, in bigger marathons, hear, audibly where that water station is. And that's been a good thing, because you do want to take your gel with water or even with Gatorade. One, it helps solubilize that gel, and it helps kind of hit you quicker. One, you also get to throw away your trash like a good human. But then also, it takes care of all of the details, like, okay, gel, and then my hands are free. You're not trying to like fumble with 10 things while you're trying to run, because those first couple water stops, if it's early morning, it's slippery. And that can be a tough area to try and get things. These are busy early miles, and it's a combat zone. At least I've experienced in some bigger marathons. It can be a bit rowdy trying to get that. So don't worry. And I'll say this now because I knew I was going to say it in this podcast, is if you need to walk through a water station, like get over and walk for 3 steps to make sure that you get your cup of water. Because if you start missing them here and it's at all of a warm day, you're going to put yourself in a bad spot later on. So I'll digress for the miles, kind of 4 through 10. Anybody want to add anything as far as those early water stops? Any other pieces of information before we kind of jump into the next section?
I mean, so what's nice about Boston is I believe I think every aid station has water on each side of the road, and it goes water, then Gatorade. So you can grab your water and then your Gatorade. If you want the water afterward, then you just have to have, double fist it. And then, you're not going to lose much time walking through a water station. Just, again, if you're a little bit shorter like I am, just be aware of who's behind you, because I've definitely been, hit from behind. So if you are going to stop and walk through, just kind of do a quick glance over your shoulder.
Great point. So we're starting to kind of enter,
I want to say, and
now go. Fire away, Zach. You're good.
Oh, no, fine. I was just going to say I'm a big fan of drinking Gatorade and then throwing a cup of water over your head if it's a warm day. So like I'm all about the double method, but often it's the Gatorade is going in and the water is going on the head. And if it's hot, then water over the head early, because if you can jumpstart that evaporative cooling, you're going to be better off. There's also, because the water stops are so long, you can be more patient here to look for your opening to get over to get those. So that's just kind of my thoughts there, is like, definitely, like, you can take both, and you definitely take both if that works for you and your nutrition plan, and that makes it really great to just do that cup of water over the head, so that you can use the kind of cooling cheat to get that going.
We've got cheat codes now. This is great. Is it up,
Absolutely.
down,
It's like
AD?
video games.
Never mind.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're at mile 10, and so we've hit Natick, and now we're moving into, I think, everybody's favorite part of the course. This is Natick to Wellesley. This is where we start to kind of see a little bit more of an uphill kind of starting to happen. This can be kind of a lonely section. I remember at least being kind of lonely here, because it feels like it's more wooded here. It feels like I kind of went into a different spot. Where do you guys find yourself here? I mean, again, I'm such a stickler for this course to try and run it as evenly as possible until you get a little bit later. So I'm still stuck on the even pacing world of things here for these miles, especially. This is kind of the one where I tell everybody, like, hey, relax here. Try to get to, Wellesley as calm as possible and feel like you're totally in control. You're going to get beyond the halfway mark of the race in this section, and it'll kind of give you a rough idea if you're super, super far ahead of kind of what you had planned and you were a little reckless early, or if you're right on where you want to be. So this is kind of I don't want to call this the no man's land of things, but this kind of feels like a lonely section. At least in my mind, because it all built up for me the year that I ran it. So definitely not the expert here. So I will let you guys jump in.
Yeah, so there's a really nice long hill right before Wellesley, and again at the top, there's more porta potties. That's always good to know. Kind of, I think early on the races when you might have some of those gut issues. But it is a little bit more quiet. I think that something to really lean into in Boston is, again, enjoying it for what it is. And it's this beautiful New England run. Again, it's kind of wooded. You're kind of leaving the lakey areas. So it's a little bit cooler, hopefully. I've only run it on cooler years, I guess. So Zach might have more insight on that. But yeah, it's just a great way to kind of find your rhythm, and you're going to be rolling. So, kind of like that trail runner mentality of using those hills as kind of your break. You don't need to push up them, but if you need to drink a little bit of water, have a goo before you hit that mile 12 aid station, like now's the time.
Yeah, I agree. Like, this is definitely the section where you get a little bit more. If it's a hot year, you can get a little bit more shade. I think you're right on that. It can be a little bit cooler here, and if it's windy, you get a little bit more protection here because kind of as you're making your way toward Wellesley and toward the college and stuff, you definitely hit that wooded section. Good porta potties right before the Scream Tunnel, which I have used. I actually hid in them for about a minute and a half during the 2018 to get warm. Which is a nice thing to do. But the I think in this section, you really start to hear. Are we doing Scream Tunnel in this section, or is that the next section? That's the question.
Yeah, we can definitely talk Scream Tunnel here.
All right,
I remember it
because
kind of for me. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So when you're kind of coming into that area, I think I can't emphasize enough how that Scream Tunnel sounds. So this is for those who aren't super familiar. This is Wellesley College, and famously, the Wellesley College. It's an all women's college, and the women turn out like nobody to cheer for this race. And you can hear it, no joke. If it's depending on the type of year it is, depending on the weather and everything, you can hear it for a mile before you get there. You start to hear this kind of building, and it's the kind of screaming that I didn't think I would ever experience in my life because I've only ever heard something similar to it in archival footage of the Beatles coming to America. That high pitched, it's crazy, and it's again getting chills just thinking about it because the energy is just super electric. So like that's a section where honestly, as much as you're trying to even split it, do whatever you want to do, feed off that energy there. I always wind up running a couple seconds faster in that mile because you just kind of ride that wave of the energy. And I would say, if you do, don't sweat it. Like it's pretty impossible to avoid doing in that section. There's also the opportunity there. The Wellesley girls have great encouraging signs, and historically, the goal of the Wellesley girls is to see if they can get a kiss from a runner, and so it's a great opportunity to give a fan there a kiss on the cheek or something, kind of make their day. My game is always to find somebody who has a really clever sign to try and like reward for their efforts to do that with. And so, like I always know that I might lose a second there because you're kind of darting over to the side and doing that thing, and then kind of being on with the course. And I think that's fine. Just don't trip and fall when you're making your way over to the side there. If that's something that you choose to kind of do as part of the course experience, but it's just the level of excitement, the level of fun that happens in that section is really amazing, and it's truly one of the areas that's and experiences that's unique to running the Boston Marathon above any other big city marathon. You just don't get that piece anywhere else.
Yeah, it's also downhill, which doesn't help with containing yourself at all. Because yeah, it's high pitched screaming. It's downhill. I always do they blow kisses, so I blow kisses back. So it's a fun mile for me.
It sounds like Zach and I both have to. I'll keep your secret from Heidi unless she listens, and you keep it from Katie. But
Nah.
I had to give my kiss. I had to give my kiss, and I feel like I knew going there, like my dad went to Boston College. So like for me to run Boston was like a big deal for him. He's like, you got to kiss a girl at Wellesley. I'm like, oh, okay, Dad. Like I am married. And he's like, you gotta, like, I was like, all right, Dad. But yeah, I will agree.
It's a very
That was
chaste
kind of
tradition,
Yeah. And so I think for me from this standpoint, like, I think I really like, I had struggled so much in that 2018 race, just one mentally coming into it. Like, I had been injured beforehand. So for me, like just being there was like a total gift. Like I was super happy to have been there. And as I'm kind of like thinking back through the course, I'm like, okay, I remember dropping clothes off and then like wet, cold, rainy, girls, and then like sit, go sign, finish, warmth. Like I think those are like my flashes. So like I'm going to stop trying to give advice at this point and let you guys kind of go from here, because I had to stop, I think 3 times in 2018 after this point, because I needed to grab more fuel. I could just tell that like I was really starting to struggle here, both from a lack of training coming into the race, but also just I had gotten so cold and so wet. I dressed really poorly for this race. And coming from Colorado, I had not been used to the humidity and cold wetness that comes with, a New England spring. And so I think that's one thing, is that, this is as good a time as any, even though probably better to talk about this at the start, is thinking about what you're going to need to wear, is something that you do need to watch the weather, and it is going to change relatively quickly. But if you are someone that lives in New England, you're going to be much better prepared for this than if you're coming from California. And so kind of be thinking about that. I had kind of imagined in my mind, I would like the convertibleness of arm sleeves. Wish I would have worn a rain jacket, but I digress. From this point here, I think all of us kind of, have our own, kind of take on these things. And so where I wanted to kind of get us to now and to kind of frame people back is we're at Wellesley College. We got just a lot of noise, a lot of things happening. We're kind of now entering, I think, kind of the to me, this is kind of the apex of the course. This is what everybody begins to really talk about. Wellesley to Newton, miles 14 through 19. In a typical marathon, that 19-20 mile barrier is what everybody typically calls the wall. And I think it's only amplified on this course because it's also built up so much whenever you read anything about the Boston course. And I think that initially kind of can bring fear to people when they think about this course, that they're excited to be at a race that they qualified for. But there's also this huge amount of fear because they may have run only flat, fast courses to try to ever get their qualifier. So hills, maybe something that's new and is different. And I think this is where you have to train differently for Boston than other races. You have to distinctly think about hitting hills as often as you can in your training cycle. I think it's worth talking here for just a second before we actually go into the course specifics, about a couple of like key workouts that each of us kind of enjoy. So if you guys can jog your memory for one that you like, from my standpoint as a coach, I like to do longer hill reps with my athletes leading in, if we have the ability to, even if it's on a treadmill, that 4 to 6 to 7, 8% even, and longer hills of like 3 to 4 up to 5 minutes, just to kind of condition the legs to, going uphill and kind of leaning forward and getting those legs strong enough to handle going uphill at a relatively good clip, for a good amount of time. So I like to do kind of longer hill reps leading into it. I could talk about 10,000 other ways that we could prepare for this course, but that's kind of a good build up for me. And it all depends on how much mileage and how much you're used to doing in your workouts. But, getting to the point where you're doing, 20 to 30 minutes total main set wise. So this could be 6 to 8 by 3, 4, 5 minutes. As you kind of prep for this course, it's just a good way to also stay mentally focused for that long, because these aren't short hills. These aren't little blips either. So Lexi, Zach, any key workouts you like to use?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing about the Newton Hills is not that they're necessarily hard. Like, I think if you were to find them at mile 4,
Mm-hmm.
they would not be a big deal. It's that they're at the end of the race. So I'd say one of the best things to do is find long runs where you're ending with lots of hills. Um, whether it's your long run would be ideal, but even just on your daily run, if you can just get some hill climbing in there so you get more accustomed to it. Again, the long sustained hills, they're not necessarily steep. So when you're doing hill repeats, you don't need to find the steepest hill ever to emulate it. Though of course that'll help your strength. It's so much more just the endurance and then the mental game of, I like to think of hills as my break. I don't need to run hard up a hill. I just need to sustain up a hill. So I mean, that's my trick with the Newton Hills.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of in a similar vein, but even taking it a step further. I'm a big fan of having a marathon simulation run where you have a very long, sustained marathon pace effort and finishing that with the hills. So, like, if you can find a section that's maybe 3 or 4 miles that has some, again, these don't need to be massive hills; they just need to be good size, kind of sustained hills of maybe a quarter mile or more, maybe up to a half mile. If you can find a section of road like that to finish the last 3 to 4 miles of a long pace effort, that's maybe 12 to 15 miles, depending on your training level and all those sorts of things. That's gonna have you running on really fatigued legs over a section of course that's going to be very similar to what this is like. It's going to give you that similar kind of simulated feel. So not only is it going to build the fitness for it, but it's also going to help you know what that's going to feel like when you roll into it, so that you can meter your effort properly and kind of tell yourself, hey, I did something like this in training. And I know how to handle it. I know how to do what Lexi said, which is, I don't have to drive up it, but I just have to kind of maintain my effort level as I go up it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you nailed it for me, Zach. When it comes to giving people the best advice I can for hills, especially in this course, is um, you have to really be in tune with your effort more so than trying to hit a pace and say, oh, I'm going to drop 20 seconds on the first one. Like, it becomes too complicated at that point to try and really be thinking. Try to maintain your effort, shorten your stride a little bit. This is one where you gotta use your arms, and really think more engaged about your form. And really be thinking about how can you get through these things as efficiently as possible and try to minimize your energy loss at this point. Um, so let's actually dive into kind of the course here. I remember the first hill not being particularly scenic. There's a little bit of a downhill kind of coming into it from what I can remember. Um, and that's about all memories serving me with right now. Where do you guys see as your best advice here?
The first two hills I hate. Like, it's just, you're going over an overpass. It's just kind of like there's no one cheering because you're going over an overpass. There's like gas stations. And then the next two, I think the first year I didn't even know it was Heartbreak Hill because there were so many people cheering and it was so rainy that my head was down. And then we just got to the top and we're like, wait, was that the big hill that we're supposed to be worried about? Like, that was awesome. Um, but yeah, the first two are harder for me, even though the second two have more climbing.
Yeah, I think when something really important to remember is as you're peeling away from Wellesley College, it gets really really desolate again there, and there's nobody around, and then you go the descent where you go into Lower Newton Falls there right before you enter the Newton Hills. It is like a luge. You lose as much elevation in a half mile as I think you do between miles 2 and 4. So you really really descend. And that's a really good opportunity to relax and get your head together before you go into the hills. And then you cross over I-95. That's the overpass that Lexi was talking about. And if there's a crosswind, then it's gonna like brutalize you in that section. So just be ready, because you pop out of the trees, you pop into like a highway cross environment, and that can be a bit of a shocker if you haven't experienced a lot of wind up until that point. And then you go over that, and again, Lexi nails it. Like, I hate that first hill; it sucks. There's nobody on it. It's kind of everybody kind of forgets about that hill, I think. But for me, for my money, that's the worst grinder of the batch of them. And it might just be because it's the first one and you're shifting gears to that hill climbing mode after you've just come off of this kind of luge of a descent. You make your way to the second one. Second one's not much to write home about. You kind of come around a corner, I think. And that's going to be the third one. I think that's after the fire station, if I'm remembering the course geography right. And at the base of Heartbreak, I always know it now because there's the Heartbreak Hill Running Company that's there. And so that's kind of my landmark, but you're absolutely right. Like, I've gone through the first couple times that I did the course. It was like, is this Heartbreak Hill? Is this Heartbreak Hill? I'm not sure. And then you kind of don't know until you get over it. Something interesting to note is that the last several years, I'm not sure what it's going to be like post-pandemic, but there have been the folks who make Hot Shots, that anti-cramping product, have been camped out at the base of that hill, handing out product to people on the race course. So I always tell people, never try anything new on race day. But if you are cramped up like crazy, and your race is in the toilet anyway, it might be an opportunity to give something new a whirl. I will say I did that one year, and it was weirdly effective. Like, I hadn't had any experience with that product before. It completely loosened everything up, including muscles in like my neck and stuff that I didn't realize were tense. But then it absolutely like firebombed my gut, and I couldn't take in any nutrition for like the next 4 miles. So plus or minus, I think it let me do a little bit more running than I could have otherwise. But it was a bit of a trade-off as far as my ability to, like, I had to take water and no nutrition to kind of try to get things back on track. I think the net was it was good for my race. But your mileage may vary as far as that goes. But Heartbreak Hill, I think Lexi's right. You kind of go up that thing, and it's kind of great. Usually at the top of it, there's like a bounce house, and there's folks, I think they write across the road a lot of times, like, the Heartbreak is over. And if you're lucky, you might get like Def Leppard's Bring On the Heartbreak blaring at you or something out of some speakers. Again, fun environment. I think there's a house on the right-hand side that has a flag that says mile 21.5 Heartbreak Hill or something. And I usually try to look for that as kind of another kind of a landmarker. If you have folks that are trying to get out from Boston to see you and then get back to the finish line, this is a nice place for them to come, because there's a train station that's relatively close. This is where my wife and my kids usually see me, kind of right in the middle of Heartbreak Hill. And it's an easy spot. There's a grass median, and there's an avenue, and you can kind of get over and like see your family real quick. They might, give you some fresh gloves or some nutrition, give a quick kiss to the wife and kids or a hug to your significant other, and then kind of press on with your race. But it's a fun spot to see people, and then they can jump right back on the train and try to get back downtown to see you later.
Yeah, I remember getting through the hills here, and I think, for me, always my mile 20, for whatever reason, my mental game kind of shifts there. Year to year, whether it's Boston or any other race, is like I always position myself that at mile 20, no matter where I am, like I'm leaving my house, I'm going to go for my 6 mile run, and I just have to go get my easy 6 mile run in, kind of mental kind of framing for myself. So like, even if you don't live somewhere that has a ton of hills, like kind of try to situate something that you're used to and comfortable with, because this is going to be the highest place of discomfort in the whole race. So you really have to start kind of framing yourself to say, okay, it's very finite at this point about what's left. And so we're now through the, through the hills, right? So we're kind of cresting through the 4 hills. I think from, trying to strategize the hills as they are, is that It felt like to me that, as you guys mentioned, that first hill is kind of a kick in the pants, and then you get used to the next couple of hills, and by the time you get to Heartbreak, you're happy it's over. But I think what I like to try to frame my athletes for is, after this, like, we can now start to kind of get a little bit excited. We can start to say, okay, the part that we were dreading and training for and working really hard for is starting to kind of be over. And we can start to kind of think about the more romantic parts of the course, if you guys will. So we're kind of through like miles like 19, 20, 22, 23 frame. Anything here for you guys, miles 20 to 23, that you feel is important?
So you, after the Heartbreak Hill, you go down this, I think it's a super fun downhill. You're kind of like, you can kind of start to see Boston a little bit. It's, we're still a little bit in the suburbs. I think we're in Brookline now. And it's just super fun. It's getting more crowded. I think the energy really picks up. Again, I just highly recommend like not wearing headphones during this race, because there's people playing music. It's a fun time. And then Zach probably remembers this better than I do. Where's the graveyard? Because I think that's the one bummer at mile 23.
Oh boy, the graveyard. I've never really marked the graveyard a lot. Is that on the right-hand side as you're coming by the train? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, they call it like the dead mile or something, because it's just, there's no one cheering. You're running past the graveyard. You're tired, and you're just like, oh, this is less fun. So you can have the high of going down into Brookline, and then you're like, ugh.
Yeah, maybe it's that time frame. I've never really marked this area. You get over Heartbreak, and it's Boston College, and like especially right at the top, and the Boston College kids are usually pretty rowdy up there, which is fun. And then I heard a course walkthrough sometime that talked about how the course rewards you with that downhill, and I love that phrasing, and that's something that kind of goes through my head whenever I'm climbing those hills. Is course rewards you with a nice downhill after this, and so just like locking into that on the downhill. And yeah, it might be that dead mile where the graveyard is on the right. I think if it is, I'm always focused on the train, which is on the left, because it's one of those areas where you're right parallel to the train tracks, and you can kind of see the train going by you. And there's something about that I don't know, I like. And when you come to the bottom of the downhill, there's a really sharp left that goes across the railroad tracks, and that's right before you enter, like, I think what's actually defined as Brookline. And two things there. One, watch out, because there's a bunch of railroad tracks that you have to run across on tired legs, and that would be an excellent opportunity to like plant the foot wrong and give yourself a calf cramp or something like that. So watch out for that. But for me, there you're done with the hills. You've been rewarded with this downhill, and you kind of feel like your legs get back under you again. So if I can make that left-hander on over those railroad tracks, where I know that I'm going to start to go through those neighborhoods with the brownstones and that sort of stuff, and into Boston proper, I'm ready to rock. Like, if I am feeling good at that stage when I cross the railroad tracks, then it's game on, baby. Like, I'm ready to have a great race. So that's always, to me, you want to divide that race mentally into sections. And as much as you kind of divide it into a section where it's, the top of Heartbreak Hill, or that mile 20 that kind of Andrew was talking about, for me in Boston specifically, once you hit those railroad tracks, from there on in for the rest of the race, it's just like, let's go. By contrast, I think it can be a lonely section if you're not doing that well, because you're not quite into the excitement of the city proper yet. You're still in some little like neighborhoods. And so if you are struggling, that can definitely be an area where there's not a ton going on in some sections of it, that you can be a little bit tough, especially if you see other people that are around you that are having good races and are kind of streaking by you. So if it's going well, it's go time. If it's going badly, keep your head together, because there is stuff that's coming up. There's more excitement that's going to happen, that's going to help pick you up and drive you through to that finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I don't know about you guys, but I still take a gel at like mile 22, 23, even though like it may seem, like not super useful, but I'll agree, like that last little bit, I'm still going to take a gel in this point, kind of get my last nutrition in before I'm like, all right, I'm fully going to commit to this last 5K. I gotta gut this out. I run marathons. I can handle 5K hard, like that's always kind of the thing that kind of goes through my brain, is like, I'm 100% with you. When I get in that last 5K of a race, like fully committed, ready to go here, no matter how tired my legs are. I think the biggest thing is that when you're headed downhill, like, sure, open up your stride, but be careful. You've put a lot of work into those quads. You could hit a cramp, you could hit something that's going to take you over. So ease the gas pedal down. This is not a time to, like, you're going to hit a point and like, all right, I'm suddenly going to turn this into a fart like the last 5K. So that's that's what I'll say there. I think kind of that 23-mile mark, if memory serves here, this is the old sit go sign. This is the, like, this is where I think the romance comes in, is that once you see the sit go sign, you're like, all right, we're getting close to finishing this thing. Like, we've gone through a lot the last 23 miles. We felt a lot of things, some good, some bad. It's been romantic at Wellesley College, and now it's time to get this thing over with. And I think it's also trying to not get negative here, because sometimes this can also be a really tough part of the course. That if the hills are particularly tough on you, this can be a tough mental space. So I kind of wanted to hear from you guys these last 3 miles, Brookline into Boston, proper. What are you guys thinking through? Any other little bits of knowledge here for the course?
I mean, this is where everyone's out cheering. You go past Boston University, which is a rowdy place. It's on a good year, if the weather holds up, the streets are just lined and packed of people barbecuing and cheering and having a good time. So I'd say get out of your head and just enjoy that energy. So that's what Boston's all about. You do have some fun downhills, and then you still have some climbs, to climb to the finish line. But again, like, your race is run, like, just enjoy it.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add there. Like, you're coming through this section, and there's a lot of kind of, you're seeing it. You're seeing you, and I think maybe one thing to point out about that Sitco sign is, remember, the Sitco sign proper is right at the 1 mile to go mark, and you can see that freaking sign for a long way before you get there. So as much as you start to get excited because you're like, I'm seeing the thing, that everybody talks about, it's right by Fenway. It's a long way up there. So, like, as much as it's cool to see it, it can get in your head a little bit if it doesn't seem like it's getting any closer. Definitely, though, like, it's an area where there is crowds. There's fun stuff kind of starting to go on out there. You're starting to move toward the finish line. Though this part of the course, I will say, for me, this part's always been a bit of a blur, because there's not, you see the Sitco sign, and there's lots of people on the sides of the road, but there's not that much else going on until you kind of get to that Sitco sign where there's kind of the last mile and Fenway and stuff, when then just, like, bam, 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 so much stuff happens from that point up through the finish line. And that's where, like, I start to really, like, my brain turns on a little bit again when we get to that stage where there's only a little bit of the course left, because there's so many famous things that happen within, the last mile of that race.
Yeah, I think for me, what I remember is, taking that last turn, coming into the finish line. It felt like forever. I don't know if it was just me, and I'm like, time slowed down, and I entered some alternate realm of, like, oh, I'm actually finishing the Boston Marathon, and this is happening. This is a moment to be celebrated after 30 some odd marathons. But it felt like a long time, and it's just loud, and it seems larger than life. And that's not to inflate this for the podcast, but it does. It feels like this. It feels very, very big. It feels like you have this culmination of energy as you kind of come into the finish line. Like, I don't know anybody, I can think the last dozen marathons I've run, I hit that last quarter mile anyways, and my body's done. I'm tired. I have, like, just this overwhelming, like, welling up of emotion that comes up for me. And, like, I mean, I'll sob like a baby the last quarter mile of a race, just because we've been through a lot, and it's the culmination of months and months of training. And I specifically remember my Boston, I had been I'd had a stress fracture. Like, I'd gotten married the year before. Like, there was a lot to put out on that course. And so for me, like, I cried like a baby that last 400 because like this is what we talk about. Like you see people, and I remember even, when I first ran my first couple marathons, I'd see the jacket like you've got on, Lexi, and I was like, yeah, it means something. And I think a lot of people at times can, downplay Boston, but for most runners, this is the pinnacle. This is the moment that they train for, and they spend, not just like months training for the Boston Marathon, but like the process of getting to the Boston Marathon is its own journey, and then let alone running Boston itself is such a special thing. So, I would really say that, for me, there is like that last little bit is, just enjoy it, soak it all in. Good day, bad day. Like, yeah, you have to just soak in where you are, what's happening. Like that's it for me. Like that is where everything comes together. I don't know about you guys, but any favorite finish line experiences at Boston?
I mean, I think it's awesome. Honestly, I think it's the same where I'm just kind of like in a blur that last bit. So it's like I know I run up a hill and I know I turn left and then it's over. I think it's such a hero hill too. Like you can definitely push up it. There's so many people cheering, like just go for it.
Yeah, I have many thoughts on this whole finishing area because like over the course of doing this, 7 times, I've done it when it went by like a snap, and I've done it where I've spent some good time in that last mile working through cramps and stuff. So honestly, for my money, the hardest hill on the course is the hill coming up to Kenmore Square. Right, there's an overpass that you go up right before you hit Fenway, and that hill sucks. I think there's a aid station right at the top of it. So like it's just be prepared that there is a little hill there. I'm always caught off guard by it, even though I know it's there. And then you go zipping past there, and you go down and you go underneath. You take a little left, and then you go underneath the Mass Ave underpass, and that's a spot where on kind of sunny hot years you can get a little bit of shade, kind of before you approach that finishing stretch. But that whole street's just lined with people. It's really cool. And then you drop out of everybody to go down, and you kind of get this quiet moment right before you approach the finish stretch in order to kind of like soak it in. And definitely do, either gather the shade if it's a hot year, or soak it in. And then you pop up out of that, you take the right hander onto Hereford Street, which again, it's lined, and like Lexi said, that's a hero hill. There's like kind of Mount Hereford there. You're going up that hill. It's lined with people. It's absolutely crazy. You can power up it. Make that famous, right on Hereford, left on Boylston. You come on to Boylston Street. But what Andrew said is no joke. It is a million miles away. That finish line is so far away. And you expect it to be, right as you make that corner. But it's maybe almost like 600 meters, something like that. Like it's more than a quarter mile away up that street. And so it's good and bad because if you're really pushing hard, then it's a little bit like, oh my god, I can't believe I have to run that far. But the plus side of it is that finishing stretch gives you more of a chance to enjoy that magic of that Boston finish line. I'm with Andrew. I've teared up multiple times on this stretch. This is what it's like to finish the Boston Marathon. I've had a cramp in my calf on this stretch that I punched down with all my might, to keep going because I didn't want to walk in the finishing stretch of the Boston Marathon. Like it's just there's an excitement, there's a magic to it. People are going crazy. If you're running down it and have the presence of mind, stick your arms up to your side and make some noise motion just to see what happens. It is rare that you as an individual will ever be so in control of a crowd as you are on that finishing stretch. You can make people just erupt. And it is so cool and so much fun. And you come blazing down that finish line, and I've been told that like they're calling out people's names as you're finishing. I've been told like my name got called out. I've never heard the thing because the roar of the crowd is so much, and the roaring in my own head is so much that I don't hear anything. I've had fans that have been yelling my name really close to me in that finishing stretch that I can't even hear. And I can't emphasize enough how exciting it is, how cool it is, how much of a pinnacle peak life experience this is. I sound like I'm doing hyperbole, and I kind of am, but I'm kind of not. It's just as a marathon runner, there's nothing more soul filling than crossing the finish line of the Boston Marathon. And it's an experience that you will remember for your entire life.
I'm having flashbacks to like Freddie Mercury at Live Aid in like 1985, where he's just like completely in control of the course, and that's kind of what it feels like when you do get a crowd to react, right? Like it's such a it's such a moment, and I think just making sure that you do soak that up, and like that's the vivid memory I have is like I was crushed. I was my soul had left my body somewhere on the hills, and I managed to like gather it back up enough to like, get into that finish line stretch. And I just remember that like the adrenaline, like I'm still getting like the hairs on my neck stand up because I'm like, I can feel that moment still for me. I can think back to a lot of marathons, but this one particularly was like, okay, I have distinctly done something. Like I feel like I crossed a barrier in the running world, even for myself. And it was one of the slowest marathons I'd run in the last 5 years. But despite that, I was like, still ran the Boston Marathon. And to that end is an accomplishment. And I think that's, I think anybody that's listening that has not done the Boston Marathon yet, like turn on your mental picture, like have one of those, like, memories that like is stuck forever in your brain, that's one it's worth remembering for sure. So, I'm thinking here, I wanted to discuss a few small things before we popped off, but anything else you guys want to add about the finish line here?
That finish chute I hate it. That's my least favorite part of the course, is walking through that finish chute. Every time I'm just like, why? You're walking so long and you have to walk all the way back to meet your people. And I think it's like, I always have that high of like the marathon and then it ends. And I'm like, it's that huge existential crisis of like, oh, now what am I doing with my life? That was just an arbitrary goal. And so I like go through that. They hand you a medal, they hand you water. You still like haven't found your people yet. So that finish chute is my low, but
I think that's a great point. It's like, if you have a chance, like when you're on your way back from the expo or something, like walk that stretch from the expo, because that's basically the corner. Walk the stretch from the expo to the finish line, clock that, because that's how far you're going to have to run at that finish stretch. And then walk the stretch from where the finish line is to Boston Common, because that's where the gear check is. And think about the fact that you're going to, well, maybe don't think about it, but just know that you're going to have to walk that stretch afterwards, and it can be really hard. I can say from experience that the before you get to Boston Common, there's the Boston Public Garden. There's some low hedgerows. They're excellent places to throw up. So that's if you need to duck into the bushes, that is a good spot to do that. There's trash cans that are along there. It is a long way, and I would say, rather than having your family and friends try to meet you somewhere kind of closer to the finish line, just have them meet you back there. And you'll be able to find each other. It's a lot easier than trying to circle back, because if you're staying at a hotel that's right along Boylston or along that side, you're going to have to circle back around and go through security and stuff before you can get back to see them. So for my money, have them meet you, as close as you can get them to the gear check, or pick out a big landmark. Like there's good statues and stuff there where you can say, just like, meet me by the big guy on the horse, and they'll be able to find you afterwards.
Yeah, I remember my distinct frustration was it starts in reverse. So the highest numbers, bib numbers, are the first gear checks. And I'm like, son of like I am struggling, because I'm like, okay, I'm bib 400 something. I have to go all the way to the end. And I'm like, if I have nothing other than being able to have a good start wave, can I have my stuff first too? Like, I realize that this is nitpicking here, but I really wanted my stuff, and to have to walk like, okay, I'm at 18,000. Okay, I'm at 10,000. I'm at 7,000. And I'm like, I need to get under 1,000. And I'm like looking, and I'm like, it doesn't end for a very long time. And I distinctly remember, I'm like, okay, I've got a sweatshirt in there. I'm super excited. For whatever reason, mine had been underneath, and it had been raining that whole day. Like my whole bag was like just an aquarium of my stuff. And so it was basically useless. But thankfully, the thing I had done is that I had worn a flip belt with my cell phone in it. And at the start of the race, I turned my phone off. and it managed to like not get so cold that like my phone wouldn't turn on. If you guys have ever experienced being an iPhone user, that when your phone gets cold, sometimes it'll just shut off on you. So I shut mine off, thankfully, and so like I had no warm clothes. So like I ended up one of our athletes on the lifelong team here had a hotel right on Boylston, and God, I can't remember. It was like a Ritz or something. And I walked in there and they were like, "Oh, did you run the?" And I'm like shredded. Like I am a shell of a human. And she's like, "Sir, you can't walk in here." I just like walked to the elevator and went to the room number that I remembered that she was in. And I just knocked on the door. I took a 40-minute shower. Like it was one of those like beautiful rainfall showers. And I was just like trying to come back to life. I wore like a female small pair of pants, like some, like I had no other clothes to wear to meet my parents at a bar. And so like I showed up and like, "What are you wearing?" And I'm like, this is what we got today, people. Like, this is it, you know? And so I look like a total ragamuffin walking into this bar. So personal stories aside, if you can, put your clothes in your drop bag in another plastic bag if it's a rainy year. Pro tip, because I had an aquarium for a drop bag that didn't go over so well. It was pretty shattered after that. So that would be my last pro tip for drop bags there, or put like a piece of bright clothing in it or something so you can find it easier. Tell them, "Hey, look for the lime green thing in it if you need to." So that's what I would share there. Any other closing thoughts on the course? I will say this, just because I wanted to end on a point of contention, is multiple articles I've read, and some said that the course is up to a minute faster. Mr. Jack Daniels, I think high on his own supply, it says that the course could be up to a minute faster than a flat course on a good day. To me, I've always framed this course for my athletes and encourage anybody that is listening. Yes, can you PR here? Absolutely. But I think this is a course that at least the first couple times that you run it, it should be a celebration of running. It should be a celebration of your participation in this sport to an end. Zach, you and I were talking about this before we got on today, that it's good to kind of keep your Boston PR as its own safe and sacred little thing. And just kind of as a reminder of like, "Oh, I ran Boston fast this year," even if it wasn't a PR overall for your marathons.
Yeah. I think the other thing is just the time of year that it is. So, I mean, maybe if you live in Texas or Florida, you're not going to have any trouble training and it'll be ideal. But if you're like Zach or Andrew or myself and live in a colder state where there's snow all winter, you might not be getting in those quality long runs. You might be doing a lot on the treadmill. It just may not be the best training cycle of your life, and that's okay. It's the same for everybody. We're all running at the same time of year, so just going into it with that attitude of like you did your best in training, and it may not be perfect.
Yeah, and something that's fun about Boston that's not necessarily the same in other races is your race number is what your seated start time is. And Boston has famously variable weather, and it can be really difficult to measure like how did my performance actually stack up this day, because the course is kind of known as being challenging, and you might have a weird headwind, you might have a 2018 year, you might have a 2012 95-degree year. So what is the real measuring stick? And a cool one you can use at Boston is to just compare what your seated number is with what your finishing place was in the race. And it's a great way to kind of console yourself of like, man, I felt like I really screwed that up. But if your race number was 6,500 and your finishing place was 5,800, that means you ran better than 700 people that were seated faster than you. And that can be a really fun way to kind of see, how did I really do? And it can be a nice way to take some solace from maybe a year where the weather was challenging and you weren't able to do the thing that you wanted to do, or weren't able to clock a PR. You're probably still beating people who were faster than you if you trained well.
No doubt. That is a good thing to finish on. I wasn't that lucky my 2018 year. I lost a few places. But despite that, I think still like using that as a great gauge and a great metric, just to kind of see where you popped in, where did you end out is pretty rock solid. I think overall kind of preparing for this course, and Lexi, you mentioned, the people that are in colder climates, like it is the small advantage that you do get to take as someone that lives, in colder weather, is that if it's a cold year, maybe not particularly wet, but if it's cold, you're going to be fine. It's the hot years that tend to get people the worst in Boston. Um, Utilizing a treadmill is super helpful. And just make sure that you have the right tools in front of you is absolutely necessary. I think my closing thought on this is that Boston is such a celebration, and I think the moment you get on the plane headed to Boston, not even getting off the plane, but when you get on it, you can do a quick check around the plane, and you'll go jacket, 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 and you realize that you're in your community already. The moment, even just sitting before you get onto the plane, you're going to see jackets at the airport that you don't normally see, just kind of walking around. And I think that's when the energy starts to build for me, is just getting onto it. So really looking forward to this upcoming year. I think this is going to be one to remember. Any other thoughts on this, guys?
No, Zach and I will be there this year. So, if you're running Boston, we'll look for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when I'm
Absolutely.
running other races and I'm having a tough time, I'm always thinking about go to my happy place. Boston Marathon is my happy place.
Ooh, I love that, guys. This was super, super fun. I think we should definitely get together and do more of these. All three of us together, because this has been a super fun use of time. It has just absolutely flew by for me. Listeners, thank you guys so much for taking the time. I hope this was a helpful walkthrough for you guys. If you enjoyed this, please, please, please stop in on Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating of what you actually thought, if this one was helpful. We will also be having a Boston Marathon guide to go along with this, put together by the wonderful Lexi Miller. And Mr. Zach Baker has had some input on that as well. So if you're looking for the shorter form version of things that you'd like to read instead of listen to, we'll have that available for you in the show notes. And without further ado, we will see you guys next week.